like to say that startups are an act of desperation, and the desperation went out of the ecosystem over the last 2 or 3 years, and we just had people showing up for the status and the money, and now I think it's getting back to people who are doing it for a variety of reasons, including the impact they want to have, the products they want to have exist, or just desperation to accelerate their career further.
I had the chance to interview some of my favorite technology investor friends in December of 2022, where we talked about observations, predictions, or hot takes on the tech landscape looking forward in 2023. Each is a mini episode of 5 to 10 minutes. Our first featured guest is Elad Gil. We talk macro on startups, large language models, open versus closed AI, and other multi-decade trends that are going to play out in technology. I had such a great time putting this together, and I hope you enjoy having a listen.
It feels like 2022 is kind of the warm-up to bad times, and 23 will actually be the bad times. It's going to be a really rough one for mid to late stage private technology companies, in terms of more layoffs, some blow-ups, some down rounds, some companies completely going out of business. And a bunch of companies will obviously do great through it and grow through it and emerge stronger than ever. And then I think a lot of companies are just going to stop working or have to shut down. It's unclear how many people thought that if you launched a chat client effectively built on GPT, it would just be such a compelling experience. And obviously they did specific things to tailor it for that experience. But, I think that really hit a key moment where everybody realized some of the potential of these models. And so, maybe OpenAI is the one to develop it. Maybe somebody builds on top of OpenAI. Maybe Google finally commercializes it. I mean, if you recall, there was a chatbot internally at Google that an engineer thought was sentient, right? And so Google and others have had some forms of these things internally, but they've always been hesitant to launch these things for various safety or reputation reasons. And so, I think competition creates the need to re-examine some of those things. And I do think eventually we're going to have some virtual assistant that goes and does tasks or actions for us, adapt kind of prototype some stuff a little bit along those lines. But you can imagine you can couple an understanding of language with the ability to take action. So I think that's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years.
Do you think there's likely to be open versus closed, iOS versus Android type of structure?
I think that it all kind of feels closed to me right now. Like there's the APIs, but the APIs are all proprietary on the language side. The place where it's open right now is on the image gen side. And in part, I think that's because those models are reasonably inexpensive to train. And then also the interpretation is broader. In other words, if I build an image and it doesn't look exactly perfect, it's probably okay. There's a lot more sort of qualitative aspects to it. If I get a bunch of sentences wrong or facts wrong due to a language model, it's very evident. And so the bar on the language side is dramatically higher than the bar on the image gen side. And that means you need better models, and that means you need, really big, expensive things to happen. In some cases, right? Obviously, there'll be some smaller models that'll be really interesting too. So I do kind of view the world as sort of a 2x2 of image versus text or language, and then big versus small in terms of model size needed for a specific application, and then you can populate that.
Right. And do you have a sense of the rough cost to do, like if you wanted to train a brand new language model today, GPT-3 versus GPT-4, are we talking, is this hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, tens of millions?
Yeah, from the various people I've spoken to who've considered at one time or another trying to build like a GPT competitor or something that could sort of fit in that area, especially something that may match GPT-4. And, I don't know how much better GPT-4 is versus GPT-3, but if you assume it's quite a bit better, then it's probably in the low hundreds of millions.
And just so, to train the base models.
Yeah, to train a model. And in part, that's also you have to iterate through it. You have to learn how to do certain things. You need to collect data. But the real thing is that I think in another 1 or 2 generations of these models, the capital scale will start to hit billions. And that means there's only a limited window of time if a startup were to try and do something to do it now on the sort of large language model side. And then if not, it basically means that only incumbents can compete, right? Google has the money, the data, the people, they have everything to do it. And so it's more just, do they have the will to do it? That may also be true of, 1 or 2 other companies. And one big question on my mind is the eventual industry structure more like the cloud world where you have AWS and Azure and GCP, or is it more like the semiconductor world where eventually TSMC just won in terms of being like everybody's fab? And either one of those future could happen, and it just comes down to how do people decide to compete, and do people decide to enter the market or not?
Are there any interesting companies to watch in space and defense?
There's a few really interesting existing big companies to watch, right? How important is SpaceX's Starlink next year? I think it'll become increasingly important for different use cases in parts of the world. I think Anduril will become sort of the default defense tech startup, or at least has a really good shot at that. So just kind of, there's other sort of things happening in the ecosystem, and there's this massive wave of AI that I think is probably one of the most interesting things happening in the world right now. But then I think there's other things that are just these ongoing multi-decade trends in parallel. That
Anduril, maybe kind of the defense tech startup. Why is there only one? Is it like a sales channel and process thing that they've got figured out, and that they're going to sort of roll up everything around that space?
I think there's 4 or 5 reasons that traditional defense tech companies haven't worked. I think the first one is there's no technology why now statement to suggest that the DoD or others should be looking for alternative sources of whatever they're buying. And there's 2 big shifts happening right now, or 3 big shifts. One is the rise of drones, 2 is the rise of machine learning and machine vision, and the third is the need for cybersecurity. And so I think Anduril really tackles those first 2 things. And I think there will be a large standalone cybersecurity company at some point, but I haven't quite seen it yet. The second area is most defense tech companies start with a point product instead of a broad suite of solutions. And so they never really hit that breakout moment where they're viewed as a defense prime. They end up subcontracting through somebody else. So Lockheed will bundle them with something they're doing versus their ability to bid on a full contract, or what's known as a program of record. And Anduril, from day one, had a very broad footprint of what it was building, so it could sell bundles. The third area is it takes a long time to close these deals with the DoD, so you need a lot of money to make it. And Anduril's been very good at fundraising, and most defense tech companies aren't. Fourth is the business model, which most defense tech companies are cost plus, which means you have a very high incentive to have a $100 screw, because you get paid 5 to 8% on all of your cost. You have an incentive to delay a product actually working, because you get paid for all the labor. And so if your labor takes longer, you get paid more as a company. It's a very distorted incentive. Anduril just sells a traditional gross margin model. And so that makes a huge difference. And then lastly, it's just how quickly can you actually close deals? And they've been exceptional at it, in part because there's a technology why now. And so the DoD really needed certain things. And so they were able to, they had the fastest timeline to program a record since the Korean War.
Wow.
So, they've really executed well there. So I think those are like the 4 or 5 reasons that usually defense tech is hard.
That was so much fun to hear from Elad on his views on the road ahead. Sign up for my newsletter at curiousdk.com to get upcoming episodes with more predictions from my favorite investor friends.